What's going on, guys, and welcome back. It has been a while. Life has gotten crazy. Not sure how many videos I'll get to doing for you guys, but I'm still going to try to keep some things updated. I got the spreadsheet updated up through the end of last month, so about 3 weeks worth of data that is linked down below. But today we're going to put it into a tier list form. What decks performed in the opening segment of set 5? What decks are going to be better as the format progresses? Because let's be honest, these formats always tend to change slightly. The decks at the top typically stay there, but some of these rogue tier 2 decks start to see some movement. We have AE Tempo, Amethyst, Emerald. Clarabelle has been huge for this deck. It also got Mother Gothel, and it's catapulted it and solidified it in a tier 2 status. It's not quite up to that tier 1 that some people were thinking it might go to, but I think most people would have left it here in tier 2 as a strong option, but it's obviously not going to be one of the best. One of the good things it has going for it, though, is it can be very quick with things like Merfolk and then the Hyena or a Flynn Rider on turn 2. The next deck we're going to go talk about is another Amethyst one, and it is Blurple. Merlin has one of the most hyped cards coming out of set 5, being able to search any card in your deck, and the fact that you have Rabbit and Goat to shift in Blurple just makes it really, really strong. There's a lot of powerful cards such as Elsa, Anna, Genie, and even Ursula cards, or Mufasa, if you will. There's a lot of good late game targets. How does this deck stack up, though, versus other control decks of the format? It seems like when you see these Blurple lists, it's just like you fail to see the win condition, but yet the deck wins, and the deck just overwhelms the opponent with too much resources via drawing and ramping. It is going to be another tier 2 deck. I have it behind Tempo, however. I think right now it's in a pretty good spot. Jafar Wheel. The Wheel Deal. This deck is so much fun to play. It is a Amethyst Steel deck, taking advantage of shifting Jafar, singing Whole New World. They have Archimedes as a turn 3 shift to give you multiple options to shift or to sing multiple Whole New Worlds on turn 5. You also had Robin Hood already that you could do that. This deck is very good at closing out the game by turn 5. It can be very aggressive if your opponent cannot stop that Whole New World from coming down or disrupt the Jafar shift line. However, if they can disrupt the Whole New World via Ursula or Pete, or if they use some removal like Let the Storm Rage on, Strength of the Raging Fire, and get rid of the Jafar shift, the deck can become a little harder to pilot, but good players still find a way to see success. However, for right now, this deck is going in the Rogue strategy. Another deck that was insanely hyped and gained a lot of traction towards the end of last format, Lemon Lime Songs. It's pretty much the discard card deck of the format. It's not necessarily a dedicated discard deck. It's another deck where you overwhelm your opponent with advantage. Some of that is through them discarding, but it's also Muse bouncing your aerial to keep playing your aerial to be singing songs just to net you more card advantage and winning, similar to Blurple. Does this deck crack tier 1? Unfortunately, it does not. It's going to come in as another tier 2 deck, at least for right now. Mufasa, specifically Rubifasa. This is a deck that, well, they got Daisy Duck. That's incredible. This is a more mid to late game deck and character focused, obviously. But they got Daisy Duck, who, if you get her late game or you hit her off Mufasa, she still quests for 2 with 4 willpower, so it's pretty good. However, it gives a strong turn 1 option, which is something that this deck truly lacked, and it helps solidify that tier 2 status. I know what you're thinking. Is every deck going to be a tier 2 deck? No, they're not. We have Popsicle, whether you play the Sisu line or not. However, I am a pretty big fan of the turn 3 human Sisu, being able to take out like a Daisy Duck. I mean, you also have Brawl, so Ruby just handles her really well. I'm not opposed to the Sisu line. You definitely don't need to play the Sisu line, so we're just going to call it Popsicle Control. We're going to put this deck up at tier 1. The deck is showing out and definitely proving that it needs to be respected and reckoned with. If you're not ready for this deck, you're probably not going to do very well. Pete's Bounce House. Pete. This card is like the new Ursula. And that being Emerald decks played the 2-cost Ursula because she's just incredibly strong. Steel decks play Pete because he's incredibly strong. Not quite all of them. Steel Song seems kind of up in the air. Some play none, some play 3. Usually not a 4 of in that deck, but to a degree, but not always played neither. However, Amethyst paired with Pete does really, really well because guess what? You can just bounce the Pete. So you can just repeatedly not let your opponent use action cards, and he becomes very, very strong, especially into a late game where you have enough ink where you can bounce him, or play him, bounce him, and you can just repeatedly do it. You don't need more than one copy in your hand. However, the deck has not quite lived up to the hype. It's going to go down in our rogue strategy. The deck that just will not go away. Ruby, Amethyst, Control. Yeah, it's still up there, guys. It is still up there. It's tier 1 until proven otherwise, and so far, it's not been proven otherwise. This deck is still just so consistent, good across the board. It doesn't really have bad matchups. It just toolboxes everything. It has so much removal and strong cards from Ruby, and so much consistency and draw from Amethyst. There's not a whole lot more to say. This deck is going to be one of the best decks for the foreseeable future until something drastic changes. Emerald Sapphire is a deck that I didn't have high hopes on this format. I thought it wasn't going to be that good, but it's actually proving to be kind of okay. Muse's songs, if you will, taking advantage of her being able to bounce characters and playing a bunch of songs. The deck is one of those decks that I don't think it has the greatest win condition, and for that reason we're going to put it down in Rogue, but it has been topping some events, so you do maybe, keep an eye out for this deck. It's one of those decks where if you don't quite know what it's going to do, you might struggle. Like, have you ever sat down at a table and played against a deck that you didn't see before, you didn't know what to do, and you're like, okay, so am I supposed to challenge here? Quest? Do I take that out? Do I leave it on the board? And you just start thinking about these things, and it might cause you to make a mistake. Sometimes playing an unknown deck has just small advantages like that. I think this deck can be very strong when piloted correctly. I just think it's a very difficult deck to pilot correctly. Amber Amethyst, Hyper Aggro. Ooh, I like my aggro. I have an updated deck build breaking down this deck, talking about the tops, talking about the common cards, the deck core, if you will, that has been used in the tops, and then also my updated list. That video will be up in the coming days. I'm not going to say tomorrow. It depends when I finish having time to get it all done. But that video is in the works and coming. Amber Amethyst Hyper Aggro. This deck has always been a special one for me. It was the first deck I ever played competitively back in set 2 when I really started to go to locals and play more, not just playing online. So the fact that it's good is really cool, and Daisy Duck is just so good for it. But the 4 willpower is insane. Like, 4 willpower on a 1-drop multi-quester is insane. However, is it tier 1 insane? Format warping, meta defining, not quite there. So we are going to bump her down to tier 2. Another aggressive deck that has been seeing some success is Purple Steel. You still have multi-questers in the form of Maleficent on turn 1. You have the bouncers that can protect. You have Smee on turn 2, which is very strong, being 3 strength. Then even coming back with, say, like a Benja on turn 3. This deck is really, really good. It's not quite like Pete's Bounce House, where this deck is more of a middle ground deck that you can tip to be aggressive. This deck is definitely focused more on the hyper aggro. You're probably not playing really anything past 5 curve, possibly even capping out in your 4s. However, it's going to come down here in our rogue strategies. I think it's very good, but where does it end up at the end of the day? Also, we will put the Muse songs just ahead of Jafar Wheel because, well, we have reasons. Emerald Ruby Evasive. I actually had someone ask me how would I update this deck for this format, and maybe we'll have to go into depth into that and do a video. This deck has topped multiple local events. They were on the smaller side, so I will note that, but it took first place in multiple ones, different ones, not the same one either. Does that mean it can see success? Absolutely. Absolutely it can. Does that mean you're likely to? Unfortunately not, because when we're talking 20-person events, you know, it's a little easier to get lucky than a 100-person event. However, every deck I think that shows up on here, when piloted correctly, a little RNG, a little favorable matchups, can go a long way. And if you know how to pilot your deck and you know your deck in and out, sometimes it's just your day. It's going to go into our rogue strategy. Robin Hood, Robin Hood, Robin Hood. Emerald Steel Bucky is gone. Is the deck gone? Actually, it's not. It's been starting to see some success, and it's going to go right near that top of our rogue strategy. It saw some success in some of the bigger side events that played set 5 at the up in Canada at the challenge event. The challenge event was kind of a weird format. However, some of the side events ran set 5, and Emerald Steel showed up. It was doing decently well, actually. Blue Steel is a deck that has insanely hyped. Mufasa, whole new world. This deck has to, surely, must be top tier. However, it's not. It is not performing as good as expected. That's another one of the decks that I want to break down, show the common cards being played, the tech cards being played, and my updated list. So keep an eye out for that. Again, I'm not throwing dates on these just because life is insanely busy. However, that is something you can be expecting moving forward. So if you want to, hit the notification bell, hit like, hit share, hit subscribe, do all that great stuff. You guys are amazing. And lastly, Steel Song. I said this deck was going to be the best deck of the format. A lot of other people said this deck was going to be the best deck of the format. 3 weeks in, it's the best deck of the format. Most likely. Ruby Sapphire actually has more wins so far. However, it doesn't have as many tops, and the wins are very close. Again, spreadsheet information is down below where you can see all of this stuff. So here's my tier list so far going into September. What's going to change? Which decks do I think have the most potential to move up or down? If we look at tier 1, I don't see any of these decks dropping. Ruby Sapphire, kind of like last format, maybe starts to slide down tier 1, but it's going to stay a tier 1 deck. I don't see that changing. Steel Song is still just incredibly strong, and usually it comes out slow into a format and gets better as the format goes on, so that's kind of scary. Ruby Amethyst, again, until something drastic happens, this deck is the deck that's just always going to be tier 1. So I don't think these decks change at all. Tier 2. Tempo, I don't see it going up or down. I think Tempo is just one of those decks that it's pretty well figured out. Players like it. It's not insanely popular, but at the same time, enough people play it where it holds that status. Lemon Lime, though, this deck I could see creeping up on tier 1. Same with Blue Steel. Like, I think these decks are very good and mostly figured out, but I think they have some room to adapt a little, and I could see them creeping up and trying to push into that tier 1 status. Blurple, I don't think quite has enough right now to do that. Maybe it moves further up tier 2, but I don't think Blurple quite has that push. And Hyper Aggro, it's just, aggro decks can be so straightforward and glass cannony. It's just the wrong local scene, these decks will never succeed. The right local scene, these decks will succeed all the time. Hyper Aggro is so dependent on the other decks of the format, I don't see it leaving tier 2. I don't think it'll drop down to Rogue, but I would say it's more likely to drop down to Rogue than it is to go up to tier 1. Ruby Fasa, just, it seems like every format is that back of tier 2. People love this deck, they love the combination, they love the way it plays, and it can be incredibly strong. But again, it's just not quite enough of a push to get into that tier 1 status. Emerald Steel, I think this deck will push into tier 2. It's starting to gain some traction. Same with Pete's Bounce. These two decks I think will push up into tier 2, and they're gaining a bit of steam. They're gaining more people playing them, more people are figuring them out, more people are experimenting with them. I think both of these decks will move up if we do another tier list at the end of September. Muses I think will still stay here. Unfortunately, Jafar, I think, is going to stay down here. This is an anti-meta deck, so that's going to stay there. And Hyper Aggro Amber Amethyst is just the better aggro deck. So again, I don't see that one moving any bit. So again, mention the spreadsheet, but here is the pie chart for you, if you will. Steel Song through September 1st had 34 tops, 22%. Popsicle had 26. Ruby Amethyst 25. I pretty much say anything over 10% is tier 1. So when you're going to say Blue Steel's tier 1, your opinion sucks. I agree it might make its push there, but I'm just going off of the results. Anything over 2% I have in that can't even talk right now. Try to put anything over 2% in tier 2. When the sample is this small, it kind of gets hairy at the back end of tier 2, but we see Tempo at 7%, Lemon Lime at 7%, 5% for Blue Steel and Blurple, and then Hyper Aggro and Ruby Faucet each at 4%. But you can't tell me a deck that's only topped 8 times is on par with the deck that's topped 26 times. Like, there's a discrepancy there. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Again, not saying those tier 2 decks can't move up, but this is how they performed in August. Thank you guys for watching. Sorry for the delay. Thank you for coming back to check out the channel once again. And until next time, take care.